Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show. Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Nelson Teffer. Hi, Nelson.
Hey, Adi, how are you? Great to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm really happy that you are joining us today. And let me introduce you so our listeners know why we're going to have an exciting conversation. So Nelson is the co-founder and CEO of ProCFO Partners, which is a company that has over 35, would you say, fractional CFOs, right? That help companies with their finances, with scaling, with growing, basically trusted advisors to many companies. And Nelson has over 25 plus years of experience doing that, wealth of information, and he's all about systems and scaling businesses, and that is going to be our conversation today. So again, Nelson, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, and of course, we need to give a big shout out to Michael Oberthor, who introduced us and made this connection possible. So he's a great connector. So thank you, Michael. And let's start with, I think we should start with the bigger picture question and then really go into the specifics of systems and finance. So the first question is, why should businesses actually scale? Like, let's say you have an owner that is right now looking at, should I continue doing things the way that I'm doing it, or should I really look at growth and scaling the business? And what does scaling the business really mean from your standpoint?
So that's always a fun conversation and a very interesting one that we very often start with when we start working with our clients, because truly understanding what they're trying to do very often informs almost everything that we end up working on and how we actually put certain things in place. Should they or shouldn't they scale is very often not the question we end up driving for. It's more about understanding what their actual goal is. For instance, very often when business owners talk to us, it's more about, well, this is what they're trying to do. So we'll look at 3 or 5 years out very often to truly understand what they're trying to grow as a business. And what is it that they're trying to do? For some of them, it may be legacy that they're trying to build for their family. For some of them, maybe a lifestyle they're looking to achieve or attain for themselves. For others, it can be really trying to build the best, whatever best means to them, company in their space, whether that's by market share, by customer loyalty, by size, is any of these metrics we can put around it. But it's truly trying to understand where the business owner, where the leader is trying to take the company. That's usually where we end up having to start.
Absolutely. I mean, finding the why and the reason why is the most important thing, because then you can direct them. But let's say somebody said, okay, I want to scale my company. What does scaling really means?
So scale, and what I find fascinating, it means something very different to different people. Very often I find it depends on the background that they come from by way of where they've gotten to, how they've gotten to where they are right now. For instance, scale to a $1 million business can mean something very, very different than scale to a $60 million business. Both of them may use the word scale, but in practice, that means something very, very different for the two of them. And we know because we've worked with both size companies. So a $1 million business that's looking to scale very often is about putting systems and processes in place around what they do. Very often business owners or leaders at that size are very good at delivering a product or a service, but the actual building out of a business that supports them to do this at a larger, and again, we can use larger for scale, we can use better for scale. Scale very often is not necessarily defined as this is specifically what it means. The way we're having this conversation, scale very often means at its most basic, bigger and better.
Right.
So that's on a $1 million company, it becomes a lot of those. On a $60 million company or a larger entity, very often we run into the concept of what got you here isn't going to get you there. Like everything that you've done that got you to be successful to this level is not necessarily enough to take you to what you think of the next level of scale looks like. Whether that's doubling at this size or whether that's rebuilding the company in a way to support the way it is currently growing or where you're trying to go as a company.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're looking those different type of businesses or different stages where the business is at. So when you say $1 million company, what do you think the range is? Because it's not just million, right? It's up to a certain.
It's not, and there's unfortunate, and this is where where we go back to when we started. It's not a specific number. Very often it's the mindset of the business owner and the leader or where they run into those struggles. Because we get asked this all the time, right? How big should I be when we start working with you? And I'm sure you get asked this similarly, right? How big should they be when they start working with you? And it's not a strict size number. It's where is the company up to? Where is the leader of the business up to? Sometimes we get called in with really, really small companies because that's when they need this level of assistance. Sometimes it's not until they're significantly larger because that's when they need this level of assistance. Very often it is that mindset of I'm trying to take this company beyond what I can do myself. And very often it takes that business owner that realization that there are experts out there who can help them to take this next step along their journey.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. When people ask me, who is your ideal client? What I like to say is a business owner is a business with a business owner that has a growth mindset, right? That wants to go to the company, want to go to the next level, knows that they need systems or want to make sure that they're putting systems in. So it's that mentality of, I want to now work on the business. I want to expand the business. I want to take the business somewhere so it's an actual business as opposed to just being an employee of the business and just going to work every day and maybe a high paid employee, hopefully. Yeah. But it's still, there is no, the future is a little bit, it's like doing the same old. So that is not going to be a good fit, right? So I think it's the same with you, what you're saying, or with the scalability, I want to grow. I want to get to the next level and I need a trusted advisor. So that will be like the next step of scaling, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about systems. You mentioned the smaller company, but I think, honestly, when I'm listening to you, it's both companies, the smaller, the bigger, it's systems. Even the $60 million company that you were mentioning, they still need systems in order to get to the next level because they have systems that got them to a certain point. So let's say you start working or even if we don't work with them, let's say we take a company that somehow managed to scale from $1 million to 10 million, and then there are the 60 million. Well, now in order to reach a certain plateau and to get to the next level, they need to maybe revisit their systems and see what systems they need now to get them to the next goal, whatever it is, let's say the 100 million, right? So let's talk about systems that you found that businesses need at different levels of growth.
So I'll look at it through the CFO lens, because that's obviously the experience that I bring to this conversation. So when we're talking about the systems or the systems and processes within an organization, as we're thinking about the finance and accounting area of a company, we think of those systems and processes, generically, if we're boiling it down, is what's going on day to day that makes the company tick. So this is where we start thinking about sometimes, yes, with actual systems, software that companies are using to help them run on. Again, what company needs when they're of a certain size, very often they outgrow and need different solutions. Something I think you will certainly appreciate. Me personally, for instance, I have had the privilege of working across nearly 24 ERP platforms. And so when we get asked all the time, well, which one is the right one? The answer really is they're all terrible and they're all wonderful. It's truly understanding what is it you're supposed to get out of it and what is it you're working on in this particular system. But when we think of systems, it's not just which one you're using, but how are you using it? How much of it is manual versus automated? How do we enter information? How do we bill our clients? How do we collect? That's when we start thinking of, when we're thinking of systems and processes, it's about how much of this have we created in a way so it's documented, clear to understand, easy to follow, almost plug and play for whoever's actually doing it from the financial operations. Very often, it's also the actual flow of how certain things go through the company. For instance, I remember working with one company where it took them almost 4 to 6 weeks to send out an invoice after they finished a project. Now, you can imagine what that does to their cash flow if they're first not starting that process until that far down. And I was trying to figure out why this was in place, and I found their operations manual from when they were literally 1/10 of their current size. And at that point, their operations manual said these are the 6 items that must be checked before they can send out the invoice. The problem was when they put that in place, it was one person doing all 6 items. But as the company grew and that became 6 different people and then 6 different departments, no one stood back and said, well, this doesn't make sense anymore. So for this particular company, their internal process and how this worked was they would have to go through 6 different departments before it would be approved to be sent out. Worst reason ever to lose a client is because you cannot build them fast enough. And unfortunately, this company did.
Yes, that's a really good example, in terms of processes and procedures that they have to be kept up to date, right? I mean, I always tell my clients that, when we start on the process documentation, that's the that process never ends. We help them document, we help them create it, document it, give them advice on how to make sure it's followed by all. And we can also coach them on that. But it's something that has to be kept alive all the time. They have to have a cadence of reviewing and revising the existing SOPs. But also when something else gets introduced, it has to be written right away. So it has to be continually grow. Those systems have to grow with the company. So I completely agree with you.
It's an iterative process, and most companies, as they grow, have to have an SOP for how to write new SOPs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's actually one of the things that we do is we write an SOP on how to do SOPs and an SOP on how to revise them, because it is actually it's totally true. So I agree with that they need the documentation in place, and what you said in terms of figuring out the automation. And, I was just talking to a business owner last week where she ended up with, I think she said she had like 30 different software subscriptions, right? Because she was thinking, okay, this will automate it and this will automate it. I'm sure you've seen it, right?
We have, yes.
So, that would be actually a good discussion point. So what do we do in that point? Let's say you have a business owner that they're trying to innovate, they're trying to automate, and, they didn't invest in their own software. So it's off the shelf solution, but this one can handle this and this part can handle that and this one can handle that. So how do you address that when you look at their P&L or you look at their expenses and you see that they are actually subscriber to maybe 30s, or more software?
So this goes back to, getting really clear what they're trying to get out of the software as a whole. Forget about which one in particular. Automation is great, but if you're spending all of your time automating, then you may as well do it manually almost. Again, that's obviously an extreme example. But so it starts with getting really, really clear. A, what are you actually spending? B, what are you supposed to get out of whatever software you choose, however many softwares are involved? What is it you're supposed to be getting out of this entire package? Because very often the reason why companies go to different solutions is because the main one is either one of 2 things. They're not using it correctly or they've outgrown it. And if you're not using it correctly, obviously there are different solutions to look at, what makes sense and how to actually get better educated or training on what that looks like. But if they've outgrown it, then the 30 different softwares that you put on become Band-Aids. And it's Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids, instead of truly investing in what the company actually needs to support that growth and scale of where they're trying to get to.
Absolutely. And, this also comes down to hiring a trusted advisor, somebody that can coach them or consult them or look at the overall or the entire picture. So there are IT consultants that can give advice. It's kind of like one centralized person, because that really is the role of a CIO, really the chief information officer or CTO, the chief technology officer. And it's something that you need an expert probably to, if you have your processes laid out and you understand where you want to go from point A to point B, then you need to look at somebody that can advise you on technology and really see if all those 30 different aspects of technology are those the right ones or not. And I think that is what I see, that businesses that get to a certain level, they really need to do a technology assessment and take inventory. And, there should also be a process of how to add new software, new technology, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just willy-nilly, just, okay, oh yeah, I saw this ad to this amazing program, now I'm going to add that one as well. There should be actually a list of questions, because I know that, we documented many IT departments for bigger companies, but it's no different than, a smaller company can have the same process of, okay, when we add software, we actually have a checklist that we go through to see why, like you mentioned, what's the why behind it? What is the problem it's solving? What is it involved? How much, what's the, setup time, learning time, etc. How does it integrate with everything else that we have? So you don't end up with this, oh, this is only $10, this is only $20, this is only $30. And before you know it, it's thousands of dollars that go on different solutions. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned an interesting point of bringing in that level of expertise. When we think of the systems and processes area of a company, very often it is the way we describe it is making sure you have the right value for those professional relationships you have. Because very often, the same way they've outgrown a lot of other pieces or areas of the company, they've outgrown a lot of the pieces they may be working with. Whether it's the accountant, for instance, unfortunately, we've seen some scarier scenarios around there where they're using an accountant from the first time when they opened their doors. The problem is they've grown so significant, they really should be getting some different level of advice or experience or expertise, and they're not getting it because they've stuck with this same advisor for longer than they should have. But this is also true with every degree of expert or every degree of vendor you work with. Payroll company, which one you work with. Again, certain things that may have only existed or fit for you when you were a fraction of your size. You have different options and different structures available to you now that you've grown to this size. Employee benefits, 401k, which lawyer are you working with? All of these factors, which bank are you working with? So many of these factors, again, we start either by convenience or by recommendation when we launch a company. But now that you've grown to this certain size and you're looking to get to the next level, working with the right piece for around any of these areas becomes more and more crucial.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that is a key component in terms of staying flexible instead of evaluating and looking at, asking yourself, are those systems that got me to where I'm at now, are they going to get me to the next level? Of course, identifying the next level. And that is part of the strategy. It's like, that's why business have to have a clear strategy of where they're going, and then ask the questions, do I have the right resources?
Absolutely. And the fun part that comes after that is not only identifying that strategy, and actually being really clear what that looks like. It becomes, how are you tracking your progress towards that, achieving that?
100%. So those are the KPIs. What do you think are the major, and I know it probably depends on the type of business, but from, as a CFO, what are the main KPIs that you look at, or the key performance indicators, measurement of success, metrics, statistics, however you want to call it? What are the main ones that you like to look at that really measures the health of a business?
Oh boy, that's a very loaded question. So we'll answer it a few different ways. There are some basic ones that are true for almost every company. Again, cash flow becomes really important until it's no longer a pressing concern. So whatever cash flow metrics you have in place become really, really important. Profitability becomes helpful. But as companies grow, and to the point that we identify scale or look to scale, it's not just those top line metrics that you start looking at, but that's when you start getting more granular to give you the insight you need to make the decisions that you need to. So then it's not just profitability, but profitability by business unit, profitability by employee, profitability by region, profitability by salesperson, because that's what you're looking to grow. That's what you're looking to do. Or that's when cash flow is, okay, great, I have this cash flow purposes over here, but I know we're a seasonal company. I'm going to run into the shortfall at this period of time. So what kind of financing do I have in place that's really going to support or get through this next phase? Or we want to invest this area of the company. What do I have in place that's going to allow me to do this? So yes, there are the generic kind of metrics that become important, but the things that really allow companies to be successful and really grow beyond that becomes, what are they measuring that lets them know, aside from the regular actual business operational business performance, what are they measuring that's allowing them to give them the insight towards achieving their goals or what they're really trying to do? Again, just an extreme example of this. I remember talking to one business owner when we were discussing KPIs. So when we think of this is more in the reporting area of the company. So reporting is, yes, there's financial statement reporting, which gives us the general financial performance of the company, which is key. But reporting is also, again, what's giving you the insight you need to make the decisions that you have to on a regular basis. So I remember talking to one business owner who tells me his controller is the one that does the KPIs and I said, great. She tells you they were for last month. And he said, yes. I said, that's great. That should tell you what they should be. And you see this business owner just freeze and then start frantically taking notes. Because it's not just about reporting. This is when we're talking about insight, not just data, actual insight or actionable insight, not just more information. We live in a time right now, which I think is great, that you have access to so much data and information in your company, but that doesn't make it something you can actually take action on. It doesn't necessarily give you the insight. So the KPIs or metrics that we're talking about is what is giving you the insight that you need to. What should these numbers be? So when you're measuring against them, you can tell performance, or you can decide to do things differently for the next period, the next quarter, the next year. That's going to actually allow you to achieve that scale that you're looking for.
100%. I agree, because the metrics or the statistics are only as good as you evaluate them. So I always like to ask, like, what data or information or what actions can you take when you look at that statistic? If the answer is nothing, then don't keep it. I mean, just doing it for the sake of mining the data, as you said, it's accessible. Okay, so we figure out how to get the data, but now you're looking at that number, but there is no action that is connected to it. It's not worth keeping. And also, it's the leading indicators as well, right? I mean, profitability is the lagging indicators, as in your example. Okay, so it was like last month. But, to your point, I mean, we obviously need to keep leading indicators, meaning like we need to look at the metrics that will predict the future and allow us to see when things are going to go in the wrong direction before they go, so we can actually take action. Because, if we ended the month and our profitability was very low, it's already passed. We already lost that money. So we have the leading ones, but we can also, to your point, we can take the lagging indicators and assign specific targets to it, like what they should be. So let's say you're looking at the lagging indicator of the profitability is at 7%. Well, as you said, did the controller tell you where it should be? Okay, so it was at 10% this month. Well, how do we make it into 20? Your target is 25. What are the actions that you need to do in order to do that, and monitor it, as you go?
Absolutely. And we've seen this play out within clients that we work with, where it becomes we're changing the process on how they bid or quote jobs as a result of the indicators that we find. So we take that lagging indicator, and you're absolutely right, profit is lagging. But now that we understand that this is not where we want it to be, how do we change this into action? So it becomes, okay, when they sell or price certain types of jobs, this is the threshold below which they cannot go. And just by putting those kind of boundaries around and incentivizing the salespeople as a result to keep it above that level, allowed them to actually change around those numbers entirely within a very short period of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, for you, as a CFO, well, first of all, I'd like to I'm sure we have listeners that go, CFO, yes, I know, I need a CFO. I don't need a CFO. I know what a CFO is, but they don't really know what a CFO is. So what is a CFO?
That is a great question. And if I ever get a simple and straightforward answer to that, I think I might be done. But the real answer is there's no official definition other than it standing for Chief Financial Officer. I mean, I know, and you know, CFOs, so we will call them nicely, are no better than glorified bookkeepers. And we both know CFOs who are almost basically the CEO within some organizations, and everything in between. So what we talk about, and this is why we talk about this a little bit differently, it's not about the title. Like, we don't care what our clients call us when we're working with them for the most part. Yes, we all come from having been CFOs. But for us, it's about how are we building this framework for financial management and growth? What are the pieces that we need to build? How do we build this finance and accounting function so it is systematic, sustainable, and scalable? So yes, we want to build this within our clients instead of just something that exists within our own minds. We want this something to exist and live behind, that we leave behind with our clients. So Chief Financial Officer, yes, there's as an aspect of this, which is truly crucial when it comes to the strategic side of things. There's an aspect of this which becomes tactical and operational when it comes to building out the finance and accounting function. So I very often start to answer your question. That's always a fun one, because I very often, when I speak to business owners groups, that's always how I start the conversation. And I usually get about 10 different answers in almost every room that I speak in.
That's right. But, for me, if you ask me, like, how do I look at the CFO? Just like you said, it's like the management and the strategy of the finances, right? And data driven, like, basically driving decisions based on data, accountability on financial decisions. So it depends really or in my opinion, it's where the company is at, because what's the hierarchy of the accounting department, right? Because if you have a company that you have, let's say you have a bookkeeper, a controller, right? And then the CFO will basically be in charge of monitoring and managing the entire department. But if you don't have it, like if it's a smaller company and you don't have it, then you're basically wearing all the hats. So that's where you say it's a glorified bookkeeper, right? So, but It's still the mindset when you're wearing the hat of a CFO, because in a small company, you have different hats. So in my opinion, when you're wearing the hat of the CFO, you are thinking more strategically of how to use the resources of the company in order to achieve the strategy and the growth components.
Yeah, and very often, sometimes it gets involved even at the identifying what those goals and strategies should be.
Correct.
What are those goals? What are the measurable targets now that we've established it? What are the strategies we're going to put in place that are going to help us get there? And to the point that we were discussing earlier, what are we going to measure that says how well we are towards achieving those strategies, to achieving those goals and hitting those targets?
That's exactly right. That's absolutely correct. So that is, there's different levels that you go through, but it's always start with a strategy, identifying what it is, writing the strategy, and then you have the tactical execution that, if you're in a bigger organization, the CFO will have the controller, will have the bookkeepers, will have the accounts receivable, the accounts payable, and everybody else, right?
Absolutely. Now, we have clients, again, we have quite a range of clients in size. So there are some clients where it's just us and a bookkeeper or us and a bookkeeping service. Yeah. And very often for those, it is more about being that advice or being a thought partner or a thought leader within the business owner as to how they should build some of the things along the way. Obviously, for our larger clients, where there's more of a full finance and accounting function, then our role is obviously more that leadership role within the organization. And how are we running this department? How is this whole entire department supporting the company?
Absolutely. So let's talk now about the financial components that need to be in a business in order for it to scale. What are those?
Oh boy, I'm not sure we have enough time to get through everything. No, I'm kidding. There are some basics. And again, we can discuss some of them in concept. There are some factors here that become really, really important. Very often, among the first things that we try to do, again, depending on the size or where the companies are coming from, sometimes it's as simple as a monthly reporting package that actually lets them review certain things on an ongoing basis. Sometimes it is budget versus actual kind of thought process that we actually try and make sure, like, okay, this is what we planned and this is what actually happened. Sometimes we need to start with where we actually planned. So that's a great example, even on the budgeting process. Very often we get asked, okay, great, we need to build a budget. And our answer is always great. You want us to tell you where you spent your money last year? We can do that, but that's not of particular value. Where should you spend your money next year? Then we need to understand where you're trying to take the company so that we can get involved in resource allocation and where should you spend the money. So to answer your question, those are among the first elements. Again, depending on the size, complexity, or level of the business owner and leadership team that exists there, so those are some of the key things that we start with. But it really does vary because there are some companies that have all of that done automatically, and they need our help more on actually training or mentoring different members of the staff or identifying what are the different pieces that they're missing. And there are some clients where they're not even ready to tackle something like that. Sometimes it's just, okay, let's start with just identifying what the goals are and how we're trying to get to. So there are some key elements. There is obviously this whole list we can get into of what this looks like. How strong is their monthly close? How quickly do they close on a monthly basis? There's a lot of different areas we can get to, but we think of it as more of this from the strategic side, is making sure there is a monthly reporting that actually happens to give them the insight, not just month, thank you and goodbye, but okay, what are we actually looking at that says what's happening on a regular basis? And do we have the insight we need to, and making sure that it is tied to the goals and objectives of the company?
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, in terms of, I was looking more for the main components. So if we have business owners that are listening to us right now, and make sure that they can check that they have that. I agree with you. So we have the financial reporting, which will be the cash flow, the P&L, the profit and loss, the balance sheet, right? So all up to date and being able to make decisions off of that. Having KPIs in place, like the measurement of success, which we just talked about, like the scorecard or the data, that's very important. So they can actually make decisions. Having overall, number one would be having a strategy, knowing where we are going, which would be basically what we talked in the beginning of the podcast. And obviously, from my experience, and correct me if, I think you will agree with that. You have to have the actual systems. You have to have a system for your accounts receivable. You have to have a system for your accounts payable. You have to have a system for your bookkeeping. If you have
system and a process,
yeah. If you have systems and process, that's right. So if you have that in place, then your accounting department is actually running. You have that in place, right? And then it's a matter of figuring out how do you actually do that, right? And that is where writing the process come into play.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good. Good. All right. Well, Nelson, if people are listening to us right now, you are located, it doesn't matter where you're located because you work with clients all over.
Yes, we have clients, I think, in more than 30 states at last count.
Amazing. And obviously you're virtual, so you don't have to fly there. You can work virtually.
No, if they're in our area where we actually have boots on the ground, we like showing up and actually doing a lot of this work face-to-face as well. So yes, there's a lot we do virtually, but there's a lot we do face-to-face as well.
That's right. So you are in the New York area?
I would say it's this greater Northeast as well as the Midwest is where we have most of our team between those two areas.
That's right. So the team is wherever the team is, then they can go in person. So absolutely. But still, if our listeners, they don't have to worry where they're at, they can contact you, right?
Sure. Check out our website, ProCFOPartners.com, or all of our contact information and all of this information and a whole lot more you'll find over there.
That's fantastic. All right, great. So thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. Very valuable information that I'm sure our listeners can use and apply.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.